It's Monday, the day after Sunday. Sunday was the day we went to church. Monday is the day we are the church. It's Monday, the day after Sunday.
So this past Sunday we had our service down here in the dining room because of the weather. Couldn't be at Marty Park. But we talked about the church as the body. And Paul's illustration in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 about how we are part of one body but many different parts. You know, one's an eye, one person's a nose, one person's an ear, one people are hands. That we have these different gifts and abilities that we use for the church, and that if we are an eye, then we can't want to be the ear or the nose. And really what we were trying to get at, or what I was trying to get at in the questions was, in asking, you know, what part of the body do we think the whole church is in relationship to other churches? I wanted to kind of focus on the idea that, you know, what are we called to do, and how do we know when we're called to do it? How do we know when the Spirit is saying, look, we want Neshannock Presbyterian Church to do this, or I want Howard Gaston to do this certain kind of ministry? And that can be hard to do and kind of sketchy in a way. We kind of wonder, well, is God really asking me to do that? I don't feel qualified. I don't feel comfortable about that. It's way over my pay rate. Also, is it just something that I think is something I think is important to do, and not God? And it's just my agenda. And those are all legitimate questions, but they're also questions that kind of keep us from really living out what the Spirit is calling us to be and do, and be what part of the body that we're called to do. And so I think, quite honestly, the most practical response that we can have when we feel like the Spirit is saying we need to do this is simply start to do something. Do something. Begin little. Begin small. Start off by saying, okay, Lord, I'm going to start. That's the step of surrender. That's the step of opening up to the Spirit to lead you to maybe something greater and bigger. Because it's never really us making a huge step, but taking that step of faith and then that step of obedience. Little steps. That oftentimes is the way that God leads us to do what He's calling us to do and to be in the world. And a great example of this is a friend of mine, John Hartson. John is a musician, has a great studio up in Vermont, and but also is a very person who's very aware of his spiritual life in Jesus. And one day, John just had this, he was working in the studio, and he just had this picture or vision of having a big benefit concert for some nonprofits and getting a group of people together to do it. And that's huge. John is usually a solo performer. And this vision was that he was going to get a group of people, 8 or so people together to perform in a band. He was going to have some other folks as part of it. He had to have a venue and sell tickets and advertising and all those things that are way beyond John's pay rate. And John decided to do something. And here's the interview that I had with John about that. So John, what was your big what if when you had this vision?
Well, the first big what if was when I had the idea or the flash, it was almost like an inspiration. I saw this big concert happening with myself on stage with a full band, which I don't have, in the best auditorium around here, which holds like close to 500 people. And I saw the house packed, and I thought, this is crazy. And the whole idea was, it was to raise money for these local charities, and to raise, like up to $10,000. And my thought was, I can't do this. This is impossible. It's too much. But the vision was strong, and it was complete, as though it had happened.
So what did you do to deal with the feeling that this was impossible or too big for you?
Well, I shared it with one musician friend, and basically said, "Yeah, talk me out of this. This is nuts." And I described the concert to them and what it was for, and they said, "No, that's a great idea. I'll help." And I did that one by one with my other musician friends, and they all said the same thing: "This is a great idea. I will help you." Then I met in February with the professor of music and business up at Linden State College, which is now Vermont State University, Linden, and shared the idea with him. And he said, "That's a great idea. The college will support you if you can't get support from the local arts agency." So nobody talked me out of it.
So I think the key from John's interview and just that simple story was that John did something. The first thing when he had this vision is that he went to several people and said, "What do you think about this?" And he got this overwhelming response like, "Yeah, do it. We'll help you." And it began to grow. He kept doing something. And now he has a band. He's got this, the poster. He's ready to do this concert at the end of October. He doesn't know if it's going to be a success. He doesn't know if anybody's going to show up. I mean, I think it would be disappointing if it doesn't, but the reality is it doesn't matter. What John is doing is walking in faith because he feels God has called him, and he's taking these steps to do something.
Pastor's pet
My pastor's
peeves.
pet peeve today is kind of summed up in a story that I heard once, an actual story. A church was having contentious, what we would call a session meeting. And the minister and the elders were kind of going back and forth on the mission of the church. What's the purpose of the church? What is God calling this particular church to do? And it came down to that the elder says, our mission is to keep the lights on and the doors open. And so after the meeting, as usual, they have the parking lot meeting. And so a lot of the elders were out in the parking lot discussing the meeting and some of the tension that was going on there. And the pastor stayed in the church for a while, and then finally he came out. And as he walked out, one of the elders had said to them, "Hey, you left all the lights on and you left the door open to the church." And the pastor smiled and said, "Yes, I've just completed the mission of our church. The lights are on and the door is open." Now, the pet peeve on that is that the mission of the church is so much bigger than keeping the lights on and keeping the door open. It is about what we need to do. What is that do something in our lives and in the church that God is calling us to do that's beyond, our own survival?
Pastor's pet peeves.
In our own walk as a church, sometimes we've stopped doing something because we're worried about maybe the implications, or we're worried about the big picture rather than just taking those little steps. Is it going to be successful? Is it worth the effort? Rather than saying, we're going to take these steps, little steps, one step at a time. We're going to do something. And particularly even in your own lives, whether it's a career change, whether it's God's calling you to be involved in some kind of mission or ministry in your life, or change in direction in your life, the key is not to take that huge leap of faith, but to take that next step, to do something. Maybe to ask people what they thought. Maybe pray about it. Maybe
begin filling out that resume. Maybe saying, okay, let's see who needs that kind of help. Taking those little steps, doing something, is a way in which we grow in the Spirit of God and also live out our calling as part of the body of Christ and being challenged in ways that we can't imagine. So this coming week, reflect on that. What do you need to do to live out God's calling?
Oh, it's Monday, the day after Sunday. Sunday was the day we went to church. Monday is the day we are the church. It's Monday, the day after Sunday.